Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you again so much for joining us today. I am extremely honored to be sitting down with Terry Salman, former Marine, philanthropist. Uh, he just published a book called What We Give, From Marine to Philanthropist, a memoir. This was such a, so I really just appreciate again your time, as busy as you are, to sit down with us and sort of share some of your story with us. So thank you, sir, so much for being with us.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And your story is so interesting because you are currently in Vancouver. Is that correct?
It is, yes.
And you are a Canadian.
I am a Canadian, yes.
And so, as a U.S. Marine, but yet a Canadian, I'm just so excited to hear your story. I know in your book you chronicle some of the stuff, but for our listeners, if you could just sort of talk about, where that impetus came from and sort of the literal journey to the Yellow Footprints for you.
Thank you. I mean, basically, the story revolves around as a very young man that I was, actually 19 years old, and somehow I had a motorcycle, so I was able to drive it occasionally, and that's how I met the Marine Corps recruiter at Plattsburgh, New York. It's on the Canadian border, as everybody who's an Easterner knows. And in that process, it was a wonderful opportunity to ride this magical road, and I wasn't really going anywhere in high school, much to my parents, particularly my father's chagrin. Um, so for some, I managed to get a hold of the Marine Corps recruiter who really inspired me. He was a very good salesman. Recruiters are good salesmen, of course. That's why that's why they're recruiters. But and it's not just the American Marines. It's Canadian Armed Forces do the same thing. But I think that he was very good at articulating the benefits of joining the Marine Corps. And I was looking for something new to do with my life. I wasn't going nowhere, like a lot of teenagers, and I felt that, and I went there and I looked in the background and I saw this picture. It said Commander in Chief, U.S. Armed Forces, and something like that. And there was a picture of John F. Kennedy. And I thought to myself, wow, what an attractive man who's the president of the United States, and it always stands right behind the recruiter's desk, as I remember anyway. Um, uh, and so I was inspired by him, and I had read the book Battle Cry, Leon Aris's, one of his first novels about the 6th and 5th Marines, of course, which I was part of once. Um, and So, and he did a good job of telling me that, which is true, that Marines served on every major ship in the United States Navy, and every major embassy or a diplomatic mission abroad. And so the opportunity to travel and to meet people. I've always liked to travel, to meet people. I hadn't traveled at that point in my life, except with my parents, and not very frequently, because there were 6 of us and we didn't have much money to travel. And so, he was very good at articulating some of the duty stations, of course, which most Marines don't get to go to, but you like Bermuda and Paris, France, and Rome, and so on. But the good thing is he painted a picture of a life that I had not experienced and couldn't afford. So over the months, the summer months, I had very little exposure to the United States, although um, I did have, and I didn't mention this in the book, which was a pivotal force in me talking to this recorder. I had an uncle who worked for the U.S. Postal Service in Boston, and he used to come up to Montreal to visit my mother, which was his sister. And we got the opportunity to talk to him a little bit about the United States. But the interesting thing about him is that he was a veteran. And every Veterans Day and Remembrance Day up here, I take out his Purple Heart that he gave me. That's the only gift that I ever recall having from him. He had a German Luger that he took from a German officer. He gave that to his son, and he gave me the Purple Heart, which to me was more meaningful than the Luger. So because I had this connection with him, which is not in the book, and I got to see uh, the last times Ted Williams ever played for the Boston Red Sox by visiting him,
Same
which
here.
was
So,
the year before I joined the Marine Corps. And to sit on, on the third base line, and see Williams, who's come to bat and so forth, was a magical moment. So I had a real affinity and love to this uncle of mine, who was, a pretty humble man. And the other neat thing about him, every year he bought a new American car. It had to be American car, and he drives that up to Montreal. And so I had this fond memory of him. And then he had this great. He didn't talk much about the war. He was wounded, obviously, but that Purple Heart has been with me for all these years. So there was a connection, and then that's really not in the book, but it's you can't remember everything, but that's that's how I made the decision. My mother was opposed to it. Um,
as they are wont to do.
yes, like most mothers do. Most mothers really don't like to talk about war and send their son off to war. But that's how it happened. Um, and it's just I would clear my head and talk to him, and he was very good at and of as I said, being accommodating. Um, I'd met the physical and mental condition to join the Marines. He made sure that I did that, and then I sort of waited, and we kept talking back and forth. And it's funny because it's the days before cell phones,
Mhm.
so you'd have to call them on but Marine Corps recruiter is quite accessible, and
Oh
there's a
yeah.
small, you know. So anyway, that's how I got to meet him and talk to him, and it opened up a life experience for me that, of, of course there are fears. You're going to a foreign country, even though it was a border country and a friendly country to Canada, of course. Uh, you know, a one-way ticket to Paris Island is not most people's idea of fun.
You're not the summer destination that people think about when they think about summer vacation.
No, and I heard about the Ribbon Creek incident, of course, um, which was a tragedy in its own right. But things happen, and I was a young man. I didn't really, of course, it concerned me, but I looked upon. Paris Island had been there for, I don't know, since 1910, or what, a long period of time, and so many Marines had graduated from there, and so I had fear of what had happened or what was going to happen, and you know, so I made the leap, as Kierkegaard said, a leap of faith. I said, I'm just going to do this. And when I got on this plane going to Beaufort, South Carolina, this one-way ticket's kind of unnerving as well. These young flight attendants said, well, where are you going? And I said, Paris Island. They said, well, you'll be sorry. So it wasn't the most uh, inviting time, but um, I persevered, and like most thousands of other Marines who'd gone that route, that's how I ended up there.
That's awesome. You had mentioned earlier about experiences, how there are things that you hadn't experienced, and I think that's definitely one of the themes that seems to permeate through your book is that this sort of internal desire, this almost unconscious pull towards life experience and travel and all these things. When you think about your life now, and if maybe you could talk a little bit about these vast experiences that you've had in uniform and then in particular outside of uniform, um, if you could just give us a little bit about, sort of where you are and uh, some of these experiences you've had and sort of this pull that you've had, this fire inside of you to continue to expand your horizons, really, literally and figuratively.
I think it's many people gave back to me, and I didn't really look at it that way until years later. But I use the example of in my book of General Walt. Um, as everybody knows, most documents in the Marine Corps are signed by lower level officers. That's the way it is. But when I went to Vietnam, I wrote General Walt a letter, and somebody helped me do this, one of my fellow Marines. And I said, if I make it out of here alive, not in a pine box, I'd like to go back to Honolulu where my wife is. Of course, those kind of letters, go into a black hole, and you never expect to hear from anybody again. Even then. But a few months before I was rotating, I see this Jeep coming up with a general's flag on it, and he said, "Are you Sergeant Terry Salman?" And it's a driver. I said, "Yes." He said, "Just from the commanding general." And I thought, why is the commanding general sending me anything? I forgot about the letter, and I was a bit nervous. I thought maybe there's some a punishment coming here or something. So I opened it up, and it said, "Report to Marine Barracks, Pearl Harbor." And actually, you can see a picture of it here. If you, uh,
Oh,
uh,
yeah.
and
Mhm.
it's actually signed by General Walt himself, his own handwriting.
Wow.
It said, "Report." It said, "Report to Marine Barracks, Pearl Harbor," and it says, "Major General Lewis Walt, commanding U.S. Marine Corps." So to 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 think about that incident in the context of you're one Marine in a combat zone, uh, he must have kept it by his desk or somehow, or his aide must have told him. But the fact that he responded, and responded in a way that, so my whole life since that time has been gradual. One, get an education. I'm an investment banker by training. Today, I'm a philanthropist by desire. You know, I mean, I don't run around saying I'm an investment banker. I'd like to say I'm more of a philanthropist, but I like doing both, of course. But you got to be a banker to get the money to be a philanthropist, because part of philanthropy is giving monetary. It's not. It's not the only way. It's not the only way, but it's important. So, um, so in the '90s, I got involved with a major hospital here, mostly. And the thing that really got to me was, one, it was a Catholic hospital, never raised money, because in those days, like a lot of places, Catholic institutions were considered a little bit more suspicious, so they didn't get the same funding that others did. It was just the way it was. But they had an AIDS epidemic going on here. So I don't know if you've heard the song "Streets of Philadelphia" by Bruce Springsteen, but I
Oh, yeah.
encourage. That's what he was talking about, was the life that people were living here during the 90s. So it gave me a chance to give back by devoting, but it ended up to be 8 years of my life, um, helping, you know, AIDS patients, and at a time when the hospital was called St. Paul's Hospital. It's one of Canada's largest, and it's the world's one of the leading center for AIDS research in the world, actually. And the man who was the guy I supported at that time and raised the money to support his chair at the University of British Columbia was an AIDS doctor. And had we not raised that money, he would have moved on to the United States or somewhere else where they paid him more. So now it's a center for excellence. But the point is, the ambulances would come to other hospitals and they'd send them to St. Paul's. They said, we don't know how to do it. And the inference was it's a gay man's disease. It's really not. It's really not something we should get involved with. So I had a couple of Roman Catholic sisters who ran the place in those days, and they used to live in the hospital. They don't anymore, but they embraced it, and they embraced helping these patients. So, going back all the way to Vietnam and thinking about all the things that we could have done to make that we did to make things better, and this philanthropy that I was doing years later I had to be inspired by my experience in the Marine Corps. And what I was taught of, of course, the practical side of it. How do you run a charities? How do you run a business? What do you have to put in place to make that happen? So we raised a lot of money, and we helped these AIDS patients. And so there was a billionaire. He's now a billionaire. He came in and saw this. I financed a palliative care unit. And as everybody knows, palliative care is a place where people go before they die. And so these were AIDS patients. So we allowed them to have their dog, to have their music, to have their cat. It was basically an apartment in a hospital, in one wing of a hospital. People could come and go. And so I asked this man, who'd be a very famous guy, a fellow who's known by Americans as well, Jimmy Patterson, to donate at the time 600. Well, he ended up donating $600,000. But he said to me, well, it's empty. I said, Jimmy, it's empty now. But I said, we're going to build this out to make it a place for these people to spend their last days of their life. So going from what Bruce Springsteen talked about, how difficult it was when you're walking the streets of Philadelphia, it was the same thing here. Not much different. And so, that kind of work that I did was when the fellow board members say we shouldn't be doing this, it's a gay man's disease, I persevere. And I remember the same thing in the Marine Corps. Of course, it was illegal to be gay. But, when as I say in my book, when I suspected they were having a homosexual relationship, I would say, you know what? I would just encourage you to not do it here, because it's not going to serve you well. And, you're a Marine, you got to do these obligations. And he said, whether you like them or not. So I'd give him, I didn't want to report them. I didn't want to charge them, make sure they were charged. So I said, the best way to avoid that is not to do anything that will cause me to do that. So that kind of thinking enabled me, and a part of it was my parents, part of it was the Marine Corps too, because Marine Corps, were very, very helpful in terms of NCOs had a lot of power. I've always believed the backbone of the Marine Corps is the NCO. So they had a lot of power, and they could do things right, and they could make things harmful for you or difficult. And so that thinking helped me a lot in raising money for this hospital. And so when I received the Order of Canada, I mean, that's one of the things they focused on. This hospital that I spent 8 years of my life, and actually more. So that's how I got into philanthropy. And then after I did that, then the Vancouver Public Library, which is as old as Vancouver itself, asked me to become involved of the library. And then I thought, you know what, better place to do something else, because here people walk into the library every morning, 10 o'clock, from all walks of life. Some are rich, some are poor, some are well-educated, some are not, some are homeless, some are gays, whatever. It's just a whole spectrum of people. And if you can help somebody with that kind of infrastructure work, then you can achieve something. And so once, those are the two major things that I got involved in the period of the 90s. And it sort of shaped me who I am, really, to be honest. So I had the Marine Corps, which was a solid footing. I used what I learned in the Marine Corps to move it into philanthropy, not thinking that I was going to do that, but that's what happened.
And was it these experiences that were so foundational for you? Was that sort of the genesis of the book? Is that that sort of that desire to share your experience?
Yes, I mean, the book was a project of, you're 80 years old. How many years do you have left?
Yeah.
And so you make mistakes. You've done some good things. Why not try to write it down? So if anything else, maybe my grandchildren will read it. By the way, they haven't done it yet, but it's hard to get a 13-year-old to read a book like this. So it's it, maybe I can put something on paper that'll help somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In the process I mean, your life is just so rich with experience. What was sort of your what were sort of the ideas of coming in? The book, as it's written, is a very straightforward chronological narrative, chronicling your life. What decisions did you make going into it as to how you're going to approach the book, or did it just sort of start small and then grow into a full-on memoir?
It started with just a few stories I talked to you about. And I said, well, what can I say that and the General Waltz story and some of the other ones, the AIDS story, there's little bits of stories. And I said, well, and then my editor, who said, well, I think, I was just talking to her actually. She said, well, now we have to put together like some chapters here, like a full circle, the beginning to the end, where we're going to. So she was happy with the chronological, and I was too. And I had some letters from the Marine Corps that my wife, first wife, had, and before she died, she handed them to me, and she said, "Do something with these." So that was a real motivational thing, and then COVID happened.
Mm.
And I couldn't see my grandchildren because they were living at a different address, and that was the rules in most places in the world, in North
Yeah.
America for sure. And so I just decided to write. It was also giving me peace of mind because um, the characters in the book. It's a positive book in many ways. So the people I talked about are not people who hurt me, for the most part, but people who help me. So because I'm an outgoing person. My wife could do very well in COVID because she doesn't need to talk to a lot of people, but I'm different. And so for me, it was a challenge, like it was for many of us. And I didn't grow up in the environment where you work from home. I mean, my environment, nobody worked from home.
Right.
And the
Right.
Marine Corps, you certainly don't work from home. You know, so
Home is where the heart is. It's usually in the well,
so
there's so
that's
many.
how it all came out.
Yeah, these sort of COVID projects. It's an interesting dynamic, and how it is almost. It seems there's such a resonance with this idea of introspection as we were all, sheltered in place, and then sort of really unpacking a lot of the stuff that we didn't have time to really come to grips with. But now, like you said, we're stuck. So I think there's almost a level of catharsis, it seems like, for a lot of people in, whether it's in bread making, which became wildly popular
Yes.
during COVID, or writing books. But yeah, you definitely can feel that again, like the theme of experience and of drive, and then obviously leading to this need to help. I think those all are sort of, in a lot of ways, are like almost COVID themes for those of us who made it out. So, but talking about themes, one of the things that you've mentioned already a few times in the podcast is this idea of team. And obviously the Marine Corps is huge on team. For combat veterans such as yourself, it's absolutely critical. But then as you look at your other endeavors throughout your life, there is a sense of like this real camaraderie among, whether it's fellow Marines, or if it's foundations through the hospital, or if it's charity raising for the library. Did you get that sense before you started the book, or was this something that just sort of came out as you're telling your story?
No, it had a history to it, because investment banking is, unfortunately, a lot of it's about greed. And it's always about who makes money and who makes more and who doesn't. But there's a feeling that money's never enough. Everybody needs more. And so, but charity work, we're just happy to have me there. I didn't have to talk to them about their bonus or lack of it or not enough of it. I could get away from that and talk to what I call different people. And the Marines, it's not about bonuses either. So, but in the corporate world, it's all about getting away from that, which was, to me, philanthropy was uplifting. It was really uplifting um, to see how little things, ideas, money, time, whatever, can actually make the world a better place, or the institution, or the recipients of it a better place. And that the book itself, when people have written me, so many people, veterans as well, saying, it's so inspirational to give back, to want to give back. How can I help? Um, so it was a different experience, much different than the corporate world, that um, gave me a respite from the world that I was in, to one that I was learning something about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you've mentioned before, the Marine Corps really, almost from day one, starts really instilling this idea of sacrifice. Leadership is sacrifice. You mentioned in your book too that one of the paths you could have gone down was as Anglican priest. Um, so sacrificial love, obviously huge in all of these endeavors. And so I think that it really resonates as you read your book, how it seems like almost from an early age, this idea of not only being part of a team, but then making the world around that team a better place. It really is very engaging. But along those lines, you've worked extremely hard, obviously. Nothing has really come easy to you. But yet you always seem to have, a lot of different pokers in the fire. What has sort of motivated you? I know you talked that philanthropy is very fulfilling and uplifting. Is that the thing that sort of keeps your nose to the grindstone? Is this idea that like tomorrow will be better?
Yes, for sure. I mean, my problem, and my wife is always trying, and my daughters are trying, and my assistant trying to get me to do less, not more. Because as you get older, I have a difficult time saying no to people. Just before I talk to you, um, a lady who works for this international organization of doctors that fly around helping people who don't have sight, who have vision problems globally. This is an organization, and it's actually based here in Canada. And she's reaching out to me and saying, "Can we meet?" And so my wife would say, "You're doing enough." Say no, but I, but I. So anyway, we're having a coffee with her next week. So the bottom line is, but I read about her boss's bio, who actually is my eye doctor, and he went to 100 countries helping out, flying around helping people with vision problems. He's an ophthalmologist. And I thought to myself, how can I say no to meeting this lady? And how can I say no to my friend who is not, well, my doctor, he's not really, he's a friend, but not very, I don't know him very well, but it's just, just a way of, so managing it, I got to go back a little bit more to the Marine Corps training. Don't try to do too much. Do a little bit less, better. And so I'm trying to do that. Yes, I have taken on a lot of projects, and some of them I continue with, but some of them I just, I've nurtured them. They need my advice from time to time, but more, and they need whatever money we give them. So I'm happy with that. Like, but to answer your question, I think pulling back a little bit is useful as you get older, because you're better able to handle the stress, and so I have to manage that better than I have in the past.
Yeah, I think as much as the Marine Corps, it really sometimes literally beats into your head this idea of brilliance in the basics. It also talks out of both sides of its mouth, because then it's like, go, 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 take the hill, take the hill. And so,
Yes.
yeah, the balancing act is it really, again, it comes to us at a very formative time in our lives. But on that note, when we look at some more themes in your book, I think almost allegorically, whereas you came up and made, had a lot of success in the mining industry, the book, I think, shows us that we need to sort of mine our own interiority, and to really embrace the transformation, um, and to really seek the meaning in the things that we do. Am I on the right track of what, so
You
where?
are, you're absolutely on the right track. I mean, you know, I talk about the second mountain, in the book that I read, which, um, at some point you have to take it to the next level, and that's the challenge that I'm facing today. Um, um, and so, and if I get tired of doing something, I should really move on to something that will inspire me more to take it to the next level. And I think, rather than just maintaining the status quo, sometimes you have to hand the ball off to somebody else, and say you did good things in getting to where it is, and move on to a new challenge. But the challenge is more about, when you've lived 3/4 of your life or more than that, what should I do next? And so I've managed through the process from the Marine Corps on and recent years of taking on new initiatives, and some of them are uplifting and like the environment, for example, which I say in my book, the only thing I've done for the environment is buy my wife an electric Volvo. I'm joking, but my point is I haven't done enough, and I've got a friend who's a big environmentalist, so maybe we start a scholarship. Maybe the thing to do is start a scholarship on environmental studies in some specific area. Like one person I know is researching the rising level of the oceans by global warming. And so I do support another charity, which Swim Drink Fish, which I mentioned, is a water charity. It's actually, I think, started in part by Robert Kennedy Jr., who I did meet on one of these charity events. And they litigated for pure water. And the reason there was a Marine Corps connection, I wasn't going to support this charity, and I wasn't going to support him either because I know him very well. I was somewhat suspicious, but he said, you should attend it. I said, your uncle was my commander in chief. He said, well, I just want to tell you that this organization was started by Marine Corps veterans who came back and were fishing in the Hudson River, and there were no fish. It was polluted. So that door was open. That door, actually, that introduction to him enabled me, and that's why I went back to Vietnam. He said, you should go back to Vietnam. And before that, I had no desire to go back to Vietnam. I have a doctor friend who lives in the United States. He's a medical doctor for aviation. And he was a doctor in the Vietnam War. He said, I told him I was going back. He says, I'm not going back. I'm never going back. And so that was my feeling too. So one door was shut. I shut the door myself. I said, I'm not going back to Vietnam. There's no reason for me to go back to Vietnam. Just let's bury that. But then a part of me said, all these things that you buried, maybe it's not good for you. Mm-hmm. If you can't forgive, you can't move forward. So I felt, you know what? I should go back. And so one door was shut, another one opened because I had more of an open mind. And somebody, unbeknown to me, Robert Kennedy Jr., who I don't know, but gave me a few words, and is a picture of him and I in the book. He put his arm around my shoulder after I told him this Vietnam story. And then I went back to my office. I took a picture of that General Watts' orders, because the Council General here is asking, when were you last there? So I put the date on that document, which is, and they, of course, were wondering, what the hell were you doing there? Of course, they knew.
Yeah.
So you see, just one little thing and the door opened to something new.
Yeah, I'm so interested in this perspective because as the son of a Vietnamese refugee, I've been to Vietnam twice, once with my mom and then once with my family, and I will never have obviously the perspective of the pre-war Vietnam. But even if I did, as a refugee, I'm going to see the world through a certain lens. My mom, when we went back, saw it through a different lens. But the one lens I'll never be able to see it through is through a veteran Marine who fought and has combat experience. And what was that like for you to be back and to see? I mean, I'll just let you go because I can only imagine what that was like. Just even getting off the plane and stepping foot back after almost 4 decades of being away.
The biggest fear of all was actually making the decision to go there.
Hmm.
And I had this anxiety and fear, and just it was upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to my wife, I said, well, let's go to Bangkok first. And I just Googled and said, Bangkok is the most exciting city in Asia, and something like that. And I said, let's just go to Bangkok. She said, I've been there. She says, it's very busy. I said, yeah, okay. So anyway, we went, and, you know, um, so all this time I decided that I needed 3 or 4 days before I actually went to Vietnam. Before, not because of jet lag, but because I just wanted to ease into it. Just really want to ease into it. And so uh, we went, and it was some things were just like, yes, like the time I was there. Other things were not. Like Da Nang was mostly, there was no paved roads in Da Nang when I was there. It was mostly dusty gravel roads. And so, but other things remained the same, like women carrying baskets on their heads, and um, working the rice fields. There's the magical like art frame of art form of a rice paddy, and how they angle up and angle down, and sort of symmetrically go together, and um, those things were as I remember them. And what went on in the daytime with people working in rice fields, it became totally different at nighttime. But when I was there, it was just like it was, except for the combat, except for you were looking for Viet Cong, and you were engaging in the enemy psychologically or physically, all of which were, much different than what I was witnessing. But the tranquility of the place, we were on a bicycle tour. And at one point I got lost on this bicycle, maybe because I was so absorbed. And but I ran into like a military guy, a student, and he spoke enough English to get me back to where the other trips, the other people on this bike trip. But I managed to explain to him that I was a veteran. That's why I was here. And they called it there the American War, not the Vietnam War. So um, I found that a bit interesting too. So, but what I realized is that it had transformed itself into this incredibly thriving economy, um, and productive nation, and yet none of them have the same. They're not taught the animosity towards the war, because it's not, from what I can gather, not really taught to school children, or if it does, they don't know much about it. So what became a very fearful experience became sort of uplifting, and just talking to people. And I would say, I remember somebody looked like you were working in this restaurant. And then the interpreter would say, he's thinking about somebody he met here a long time ago. And then the girl would understand what I was talking about. So it was strange, but it ended up to be a really uplifting experience, because it was peaceful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And unlike, you have to move forward, and forgive and so on, and they weren't wrapped up in what was happening in the war, and I couldn't. So to me, it was a it turned out to be a very positive experience.
That's awesome. So
And we went back another time.
oh, really?
Yeah, we went back for another called the Indochina experience. So we went to Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. You know, and Laos was probably the most bombed place on earth. And you know, and then I read about Bien Bien Phu and how, and then oh, here's the big thing, the 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 war itself. You know, I never really understood how they were able to the North Vietnamese and South Korean were able to recapture this whole country and make it one. And so I read this little pamphlet that they issued. It's a bit propaganda, but it was well done. And how the French were defeated at Bien Bien Phu. And it wasn't really a propaganda. It was just a historical piece that I picked up when I was in Vietnam. And then I think about all these tunnels that we, you know, looking for Viet Cong, and so that we maneuvered and worked through and so forth on the Ho Chi Minh Trail or elsewhere. And I thought to myself, how did those people, they had to have the support of the people, men, women, and children, to move up artillery to this high ground to attack the French air base that was in the wrong place in the valley, because and I saw where they did that in Laos, and then I saw again the tunnels on the last trip in Vietnam. So how they provided the infrastructure and the support, they had to have the will to have a country to do that. It couldn't have been just one politician or two politicians. It couldn't have been just Ho Chi Minh. There had to be more. There had to be more.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, just looking at the history of, you know, of colonialization and occupation, you know, dating, you know, well before the World War II, and you know, expelling the Japanese and then the French again, and then the U.S. comes in, and then China after that. It was an extremely tumultuous time, and I agree with you, sir. My time there, I just really enjoyed just how serene everything was, and the you know, the assumption was that there was just going to be, you know, mental, physical, you know, landscape scarring throughout, but yet I was just so taken in by the landscape and the beauty of the country. So, you know, thank you so much for sharing those experiences. And so, I know you're super busy, and again, thank you so much for your generosity. I just have one more question for you, sir. You know, looking at this book, and now that you've had some time separated, you get some, you know, arm's distance from its publication, and it's on the shelves, and you're getting feedback. What are some of your takeaways from writing the book? And then not just what are your takeaways, what would you like your readers to take away from it as well?
I take them. I'd like them to believe that, you know, we can live a life with purpose. And with so much mental illness in the world that we never talked about during the Vietnam War out there, and so many issues. There's a lot to be thankful for. So the takeaway is just don't stop.
Yeah.
Just continue trying to grow. Do what the Vietnamese, you know, as you point out, I point out, they don't spend a lot of time talking about how tough it was, you know, in those days, because maybe they don't know, but they're looking forward. And I think if you look forward, I want people to read the book and say, we can make a difference. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money. It doesn't have to be titles. It doesn't have to be a fancy job or fancy anything. Just we can make a difference by doing small things every day of our lives. I mean, and I'm not talking about giving a panhandler $2 or $5. You can make a difference in people's lives, and by getting involved in good causes. That's what I'd like them to take away. And the other message is to forgive. If you can't forgive, you're not going to go forward. There's a lot of anger in the world, especially, and I think working from home and all this stuff has caused, it's harder to understand than when I first went to Plattsburgh, New York, like I told you, to talk to that recruiter. I had all the freedom. I didn't have to worry. There was no such thing as working from home.
Yeah. I wish I could remember where the quote came from, but the idea was, and I'll probably butcher the actual quote itself, but the idea is that holding on to a grudge or the lack of forgiveness is like you taking poison expecting the other person to die.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it eats you up from the inside.
It's there's too much, there's enough anger in the world. We need to, and geopolitically, it's so difficult now. You got so many different factions. It's really hard to focus on things that are non-negative. Go back to that trip to Vietnam, those peaceful rice paddies. My wife and I watched a movie the other night because it was about Vietnam, and the scenery was spectacular, and it just reminded me of the last time I was there. And I'd like to go back again because, so you see how one very, very negative perception had said, in William Manchester's book, Goodbye Darkness, he spent and I quoted in my book, actually, he would never go back to Japan. And he called them Japs. And he was never going to call them anything else but Japs. So he gets on this plane, and guess what? There's Japanese flight attendants. And it's this long story of him mellowing. He goes back to Iwo Jima and these are the places that he was at. And it's a story of renewal. And so my trip back to Vietnam was one of renewal. And so the takeaway I want people to realize is that we can do better to make a better society. And it doesn't have to be a lot that we individually can do, but we can do better. And accepting the status quo in this age of mental illness and so much more coming up that's available to people, and in terms of getting help and so forth, we can do better to make a better society. That's really the message.
Well, sir, we appreciate everything that you do to make things better for those in need, and for making us better, for spending time with us, sir. I really appreciate it sincerely. Where can we find you, sir? What's next for you? Where can we sort of follow your?
Yeah, so there's a book. I'm going to put this podcast on it. I've got a email, whatwegivebook.com.
All right, sir. Well, we will definitely put that in our show description, and we'll definitely feature your book. But again, thank you so much for taking the time. For our listeners out there, please check out What We Give, From Marine to Philanthropist, a memoir by Terry Salman. Sir, again, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us and taking the time to spend to wedge us into your extremely busy schedule. So again, thank you.
Thank you very much. Good talking to you.
Have a good day, sir.
Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. I am William Truding, but you've also heard the voices or contributions of Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Lichman, or Ty Frazier. The opinions expressed in this episode do not reflect the official stance of the Marine Corps, DoD, or Marine Corps Association.